Hey everybody, what's going on? So we just launched the newest version of the CS3D imaging software. It's version 3.10.38. It's arguably the biggest update that we've ever done to the 3D software, and there are lots of new features. For example, have you ever wanted to create multiple panoramic curves, one for the mandible, one for the maxilla, without having to delete one or the other? Or how about more easily creating multiple treatment plans? Or maybe your measurements, you want them sticking to the actual slice. Or your crowns and implants not moving accidentally and being able to lock them in. Or a bunch of new annotations to make it easier to communicate with your patients or other dentists. All of that and more in this upcoming video. Tons to get to, so let's get to it. All right, let's jump into it. So the first feature is that scans will now open 50% faster than before. I don't think I need to demonstrate that. Pretty self-explanatory. So that's a nice thing. Rather than waiting so long, it's just going to open faster. Next thing that you're going to notice is the different layout. Okay, so the different layout of the tabs, and this is key. So before you had orthogonal, curve slicing, custom slicing, oblique slicing, and review. And orthogonal and oblique were very similar in what the feature sets were and what it looked like and what it did. In fact, oblique could do pretty much everything that orthogonal could do and more. It was just a bit redundant. So they consolidated both the orthogonal and the oblique slicing tabs into one. That's now called the MPR tab. So you're going to get your axial, coronal, and sagittal views in the MPR tab and be able to change the angles like you were in the oblique slicing tab. MPR stands for multiplanar reconstruction, and it basically just means your slice views here. Curve slicing is still curve slicing, most commonly used for implant planning. That's all the same. And bilateral, formerly called custom slicing. I'm going to change a different scan for this. So under bilateral, again, previously called custom slicing. Most common application is using it for bilateral TMJ evaluation. And the custom slicing name just didn't make a lot of clinical sense. So they changed that to bilateral. It does the same thing as it did before. It's just with a different name. So for example, really quick, let's evaluate the condyle here. We move our slice axially until we see the condylar head. Select our TMJ creation mode, and we just draw two lines or one line, and it automatically generates the one bilaterally, and we have a good view of our TMJ bilaterally. So again, the feature is the same. It's just the name of the tab that changed. And then review tab, that's the same as before. So this is the new layout, more concise, more clinically named, just easier to understand. Next up is this horizontal toolbar. Okay, so a lot of the commonly used features we've moved to the top of the screen. Instead of having it over on the left-hand side, kind of disappearing into the different options and the tools. So very commonly used features will be up here. I'll get into some of the new features here in a little bit about what these do and how to use them. I just wanted to point out that this new horizontal toolbar for commonly used features. All right, next up is the analysis tab. So we had this capability in the previous versions. It was a little bit harder to get to and create. So it's a lot more simplified in this version. The analysis feature allows you to easily create multiple treatment plans. All right, so I can create one treatment plan, maybe with 2 implants, one with 4 implants, or whatever you wanted to do. And the point is, if you wanted to create multiple treatment plans to, number one, show your patients more easily the different options, the different treatment options, you could do it that. Or maybe just for yourself. Maybe you have a complex case that you wanted to treatment plan couple of different ways to help you visualize which is the best way for you to treat the case. You could use it for that application too. You'll see I have 2 of them created already, and creating a new one, I would just say new analysis. I can name it, whatever. Select OK, and you'll see it will reopen the scan as a blank slate for you to then create another treatment option or another treatment plan. Then you can actually create whatever you want. That'll all be saved, and you would have that additional treatment plan. So you can see here, this is the one I just created. If I wanted to go to a different one, I can select the one with 2 implants, for example. and it will go back and forth using the same DICOM data and allows you to then create multiple treatment plans very, very easily. And again, to show your patients or for your own visualization. So you can see here, this is the other one I started to create that was called 2 implants. I didn't really do anything with it. I just aligned the models with the DICOM. And if I wanted to go back to the one with 4 implants, you just select that, and then you can easily go back and forth. It's worth noting that the more objects you have in the scan, whether it's multiple implants, multiple crowns, multiple models, and wax ups and everything, that it does take longer for the scan to open. So just be cognizant of that. All right, let's go over a couple of the new features in the horizontal toolbar. First of all, the selection arrow. This is not new. It was formerly on the left-hand side of the screen. It's now on the horizontal toolbar because it is commonly used. And just so you're aware of what it does, if I'm placing implants and I don't have this selection arrow highlighted, I don't get the little 3 nodes or movement handles on the implant, or anything that you can grab and move. You won't be able to do it unless this selection arrow is on. Now you can see your movement handles reappear. Okay, that also holds true, like I said, maybe for the nerve canal. This is highlighted. If it were not highlighted, I have no little nodes over here. And when I select it, you have the option to manipulate those objects. So just to clarify what that does, for one. Number 2, we've got our measurement tools. This is all the same as before, with the exception that they combined the measurement and multi-measurement into just the measure button. So before, when you select measure and then you take a measurement, if you wanted to take another measurement, you have to go back and forth and select it to continue to take multiple measurements. Or there was an option with the little drop down and you can select multi-measurement and then you can take as many as you want without going back and forth. So we removed the multi-measurement and just kind of combined it into one. So now there's just the one default measure button, and I can select as many measurements as I want without going back and forth. And then when you're done, you just hit the selection arrow to make sure that you're able to do other functions. We have also added the ability to draw arrows anywhere on our scan. So let's say as we're slicing through our scan and we want to draw an arrow to this low density lesion and this bifurcation, we can actually select our little arrow. We can draw an arrow here, of course, change the color. And also, if we wanted to manipulate it more, we select the arrow and then we can make it longer or change the angle or whatever else we want to do there. We can also add text. So maybe we want to add a little text here, apical delta, and then select OK. Now, if I move away from that note and that arrow, we can see here in our object bar, which I'll go through more here shortly, we can see that we have this little center on annotation, which is similar to center on the implant, center on the crown. So when I select it, it will jump the scan exactly back to what we were just looking at, which is nice. So it's a nice little feature. In fact, you can actually export this scan with these notes. And if you're sending a scan to another dentist or a specialist, or if you're a specialist sending it back to your referring dentist, it's actually a nice way to show them what you see, what you're looking at. So if the dentist opens up the scan, you send them the DICOM data, this data stays embedded into the DICOM set. And then the other dentist can simply hit center on annotation, and then it's going to jump that DICOM data set exactly to what they're trying to point out to you. Now, that font is pretty small, so if you want to increase the font, you can go into the preferences, and you're going to select the annotation arrow, and then you can increase the font this way. So it makes it definitely much easier to see. And of course, you can draw circles or rectangles or anything that's freehand, and of course, change the color and all that stuff. All right, we can delete all these annotations. This is actually new also to make sure that we don't delete things accidentally. It's going to ask us to make sure that we confirm that. We're going to say yes. Okay, so one very helpful feature is you can now have measurements stick to specific slices. What do I mean by that? Well, go into your preferences select the measurement tab, and you can see the two options that affect the behavior of your measurements and notes. Volume was how it worked previously only. So let me delete this. And if I create a measurement, for example, doesn't matter what it is, and I start slicing through the volume, your measurement stays here. And once you move away from that original slice, this measurement really becomes useless. It has no value unless you were exactly where you were before, right? So this is how it worked previously. And now what we can do is change it to slice. And of course, this makes a lot more sense. So when I create a measurement here now, when I move away from that measurement, all right, that measurement stays attached to where I took the actual measurement. And I have that same option as implants and crowns. Now I can center on measurement. So I can go back to this measurement and remember exactly what I was measuring, what that measurement is, and it stays attached to the slice. So far more effective and helpful. But if you wanted to have it still attached to the volume, you could. One application that comes to mind, probably not too common, but if you're trying to measure, let's delete this one. If you're trying to measure a curved canal, for example, and you want to measure and slice or slide through the scan as you go, you could do that if it's attached to the volume. So we're on, for example, our polyline, and I want to measure here from the chamber. I'm going down the canal as it's curving, and then I lose the canal. Well, now I can continue to slice and finish taking my measurement to get a little bit more of an accurate measurement as you're slicing through the scan. So that would be one application. Okay, let's cover the object toolbar next. Previously, the object toolbar, you would only see one of these objects. There was a triangle here, and if you didn't have that open, you wouldn't even see them at all. So sometimes a lot of users weren't even aware that the object toolbar was there, and you would only see one at a time. So for each one you wanted to open, you would have to click on the arch, select the new object, and so on. So there was a lot of clicking. So now, as you add objects, that object will automatically populate here. And you can have it either open or closed. So when I open up my implant object, you can see all of my implants are here. If I want to close it just to kind of keep things neater, you can do that as well. Or you can have it all opened simultaneously. If you're playing around with the software a lot and creating a complex treatment plan, I find it helpful to have them all open. So I can easily select and delete and edit what I want without having to open and close the object on a regular basis. It just makes it faster and easier to do a treatment plan. Now, within the objects, we've got some new features too. So we can actually now lock the implants and crowns, which is great. You won't have to worry about moving them accidentally when you already have them in a perfect position. To lock an implant, you just select the little three dots and then select lock. All right, if you want to unlock it, you can just select it to unlock it, or you can also just hit the three dots to select unlock. When it's locked, all right, so now we've got all my implants locked, all my crowns locked. So we can actually see here, when I move my mouse over my crown, you can see it's locked. And it's on top of the implant, and you can see it's locked. And I can do the same thing on my other views. You can see the little lock as I zoom in. So that's nice, very helpful. Once you create your treatment plan, of course, you can go ahead and lock it all in to make sure it stays exactly where you want it. A couple of other minor but helpful little user tools. So let's say we have our crown that's unlocked, and when I let's unlock all of them. In fact, when I hover my mouse over each crown, it kind of now turns blue, so you'll know which one you're on, which one you're selecting, which one you want to edit. And when I manipulate my crowns, don't make fun of my treatment plan. This is just for visualization purposes, okay? And when I manipulate my crown, when I select it, and the little gyrosphere appears, and the movements are actually a lot smoother than they were in the previous version. So it helps for making really fine-tuned movements. All right, so they're nice and smooth now. All right, let's talk about mapping the arch. Okay, so in previous versions, you could only map one arch at a time. This is actually one one of the better features that's been updated in this version going forward. Really nice and helpful. So when in the previous version, you can only map one arch at a time. So you would map the maxilla, treatment plan the maxilla, then move to the mandible. You would delete the mapped maxilla. All of your treatment plan stays there, but you're deleting what you've mapped in the maxilla. Then you would map the mandible and treatment plan the mandible. It's just kind of a pain, and it's more difficult to visualize and treatment plan. So what we can now do is have multiple arches mapped and toggle back and forth, which is really, really helpful. So here you can see we have mapped the arch in the mandible. And if I wanted to move to the maxilla now, you can see that the shape of the maxilla is different, and it's really not mapped the same way. So all I need to do is create another panoramic curve. This is where I want to. And I'm going to go around the arch. We're going to create another arch like so. And now I have one mapped for the maxilla. And now you can see down in my objects toolbar, we actually have two arches that are mapped, and you can name them. All right. So this is the one that we're currently on for the maxilla. So I'm going to double click and just call this maxilla. What a surprise. I'll go into the mandible. Name that mandible. And now when I want to go back and forth, I can treatment plan the maxilla, and then it automatically jumps everything to my mapped maxilla. Then select mandible, and it does the same thing. It jumps everything to the mapped mandible. So super helpful when treatment planning multiple arches. Makes it much, much easier. All right, let's talk about slice thickness and the spacing values. These have been simplified to more round numbers, kind of more easily identifiable. In the previous version, you would click on the slice thickness and you might get some weird values that aren't really kind of whole numbers or round values. So we changed that to rounded numbers. For example, in the previous version under curve slicing, it would say 19.9 instead of 20, which doesn't make a ton of sense. So we just rounded these numbers to make it easier. Also, your spacing values. So when I want to look at a 3x3, for example, these spacing values are also more uniform. Okay, before you might have seen 1.1 or something like that. Now it's more round numbers at 1 millimeter or whichever one you want to choose. In addition to that, in the previous versions, once you look at multiple slices like this, your ability to change the slice thickness was not there. You couldn't do it. So now what we can do is not only look at multiple slices like so with more rounded values, but we can also change the slice thickness of each of the slices. So I want to change the slice thickness to 1 millimeter cuts. All right, but I'm looking at still 1 millimeter slice spacing. All right, so depending on how you want to visualize it, you can adjust accordingly. So what you can also do with the slice thicknesses, I'm going to change to this scan to illustrate this. So in previous versions, if you wanted to change the slice thickness of all three views, you'd have to change it manually for each one. So in the current version, now you can go into your preferences and go to your MPR views, and you'll notice you now have two new options. Enable synchronization for the slice values and mode in the MPR tab. I'll explain what mode is in a second. But this is going to be in the MPR tab, which we're in over here, and then enable synchronization for slice values and mode in the bilateral tab. All right. There are no options to synchronize the slice values in the curve slicing because it's very common. You're looking at the panoramic view at a thick slice, your cross sectionals at a thin slice. It doesn't make a lot of sense to try to synchronize those slice values in the curve slicing tab. But for MPR and bilateral, it certainly makes sense. With this synchronized, when I change my slice value to 500 microns, all slices change to 500. And so on. Same thing would go in bilateral if I have that one selected. And where it said mode in the preferences, mode is this AVG, which is your typical way to view your scans, versus MIP, which I believe stands for maximum intensity projection. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but you can see here when I change it to MIP, they all change to MIP. which really doesn't have much value until you change the thickness of your slices. And I still don't know any great application for this. You can also add some applications in the comments if you do use it. Not a new feature, but just clarifying. All right, so now we can actually synchronize everything, which is nice. Exporting. All right, so in our horizontal toolbar, we've got the normal way to export with the DVD and USB. That's all the same. But now we have an option to export the volume, which we had before. But the one major difference is when we select to export the volume this way, before when we did it, it was purely exporting the DICOM only with a variety of options and variables that you can select. Now when I select it, I can actually include the light viewer. So I can now export this to a folder of my choice, to my desktop, to wherever. And again, before I was only getting the DICOM data, but now I can actually export it with the light viewer. I can go into my advanced options to have the same type of options I had in the previous version. All right, so now I can export it, include the light viewer to any folder on my desktop, where previously the only way to get the light viewer was your DVD or USB. Also, when you export the volume, previously it would export and just kind of assign like weird random numbers and letters to the folder, where now when you export it, it will automatically assign the patient's name, which is nice. So this next feature I absolutely love. It sounds silly, but previously your default screenshot in each of your views was a DICOM screenshot. And DICOM screenshots could only be used in DICOM viewers like Film Composer reports or implant planning reports or any other DICOM viewer. So it's less commonly used. And the camera icon, which can be either JPEG or TIFF, these options are the same in the preferences, but just to kind of illustrate where those options are, JPEG, TIFF, or PNG, is now the default option. So before, every time you wanted to capture a JPEG screenshot of this image, you'd have to hit the drop down arrow, change it to the camera icon, and then capture your image, which shows up in the gallery. Or if you're using CSI 8, automatically shows up in your data set. So now all of them are defaulted to the JPEG and just saves you a couple clicks. Sounds silly, but love it. And finally, the last feature we're going to cover is the report editor. And I'm going to go to this case to illustrate. I'm going to grab a couple of screenshots here and here and here. You might be used to the Film Composer, and the Film Composer is great, has a lot of nice features to it. You can create custom templates and things like that. Although the creation of the templates, I would say, was a little bit more cumbersome. You can still use the Film Composer, of course, but now there's a new option called the Report Editor. So when I select on that, it's going to automatically launch my report editor. This is really a much more user-friendly document to create custom reports for any referring dentist or patients or anything. So I'm not going to go into crazy details on how to create this stuff. Most of it's self-explanatory. I'm just going to grab one of these icons, this picture logo. When I grab this, of course, I can resize it to my liking. When I double click on it, it's going to point me to importing a logo. And then you can resize it exactly how you want it on the page, doctor's name. All these boxes are super customizable to put whatever you want in there. And then you would just select save, and saves it as your default template for next time. It really makes it simple. You'll also see the 3 images I grabbed are on the right-hand side. The Film Composer would automatically grab 4 images, 1, 2, 3, 4, and put them there. The report editor will only put the images that you select. So those 3 images that I selected are here. I can just drag and drop. And of course, I can resize them to my liking. I can create a PDF. I can email it to somebody. And it's just a really nice kind of simple open format to create a custom report. So that's really nice. So that's it. Those are all the new features in the new version of the CS3D imaging software. Hope you guys found this helpful. If you have questions or comments, feel free to do so, and we'll see you next time.